You're tired, aren't you? Not just your body, but your mind, the one that's been straining for far too long to appear strong. You think you just need a little rest to be okay, but the truth is, you've never truly rested. You stop your hands, but your mind remains restless. You sleep, but in your dreams, you're continuing the unfinished work. You're not resting, you're just postponing the next collapse. We are living in an era that worships busyness, where people equate their self-worth with productivity and contribution. The collective unconscious, that which Carl Jung spoke of, operates silently like a machine, making us forget the simplest thing. We are human beings, not tools, and in the intoxication of that performance, we lose our vital energy, we lose ourselves. But rest, according to Jung, is never about avoidance. It is the ritual of returning to the self, the deepest, most authentic part in each of us. When we dare to stop, to be silent, we begin to hear the whisper of the soul, and that is precisely when we become dangerous, not because we are stronger than anyone, but because the unconscious, fear, or illusion no longer dominates us. In today's video, you will realize that rest is not weakness, nor a luxury reserved for the privileged, but a sacred invitation, compelling you to return and confront the part of your soul that has been silent for too long amid this noisy rhythm of life. So, set aside all plans, all to-do lists, all the voices in your head telling you that I don't have time to rest. Take a deep breath and allow your mind to be still. In today's video, we won't talk about rest as a mere pause, but as a journey back to the strongest, most lucid state of the soul. Part 1. The collective psyche. Have you ever noticed? We are living in a world where busyness is exalted as a symbol of self-worth. When you say, "I'm so tired," someone will respond with, "Hang in there a bit longer." Everyone is. When you slow down, others look at you with a mix of pity and suspicion. An entire culture has been built on an invisible belief that rest is laziness, weakness, falling behind. Carl Jung once called such beliefs products of the collective unconscious, that hidden power steering how we think, feel, and act without us even realizing it. The collective unconscious is not some distant force. It lies right in the way we grab our phones each morning to check messages before we can even breathe. It manifests in the guilt when we sit still, in the unease when there's nothing to do. We are living in an age of mob psychology where noise is mistaken for vitality and silence is labeled stagnation, as if humanity fears its own quiet, because in it there's nowhere left to hide from ourselves. So, before you listen further, try slowing your breath once, just to feel where your mind races when nothing is pushing you. Try observing a day in your life. Wake up, grab the phone, scroll social media. Each tap on the screen is a small drop of dopamine flowing into the brain, a legalized mental painkiller. You rush out of the house, not because of some urgency, but because you fear the aimlessness of being alone. At work, you converse with colleagues through a social mask. Then in the evening, you keep scrolling until your eyes burn. Deep down, you're not resting at all. You're just under collective hypnosis. Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But in this era, perhaps the heaviest burden is no longer just the unlived life of the parents, but the unfelt life of an entire society. A society running on the fear of falling behind. We carry within us a collective psychological legacy, to strive upward, to prove ourselves, to be busy, to feel valuable. It is no longer a personal choice, but a mandate of the era's unconscious. It's ironic that what we believe to be strength, endurance, perseverance, never stopping, is precisely what drains our vital energy day by day. Jung called this the shadow of society, the darkness we refuse to acknowledge. Society praises success but conceals burnout. It demands that people push forward, yet forbids them from pausing. This shadow exists not only in systems, but also imprints itself on every individual. It makes you feel guilty for resting, anxious when unproductive, and empty even after achieving everything. The collective psyche operates like a nameless religion. It has doctrines, work hard, rituals, deadlines, KPIs, achievement check-ins, and even punishments, the sense of worthlessness when we stop. You don't need to believe in it, because it has already believed in you. It has been programmed into your unconscious since childhood. When parents praised you for higher grades than others, when teachers said, "Try harder," when society declared that successful people never rest, and so you grow up with an invisible fracture. You know how to strive, but not how to stop. In Jung's language, this is the imbalance between consciousness and the unconscious. When we overly identify with the ego, the part striving to control, prove, conquer, we lose connection to our deeper self, where true power, creativity, and natural wisdom reside. Rest, therefore, is not just halting activity, it is the act of withdrawing control from the collective psyche to reclaim inner freedom. Rest is a declaration. I am no longer a product of the era's unconscious. I am my own human being. Consider those people you sense have real power, not the loud kind of authority, but the quiet strength that makes others listen when they speak and fall silent when they gaze. They share one trait: they do not react to the crowd. They know how to stand outside the chaos without being swept into it. They are the ones who have mastered the art of rest, for only when the mind rests do we see what others cannot. In Jungian culture, the one who knows rest is the one who dares step out of the collective unconscious to live a conscious life. And that, in this age, is an act nearly revolutionary, because when you pause, you begin to hear the sounds the world wants you to forget, the soul's sigh. When you no longer fear silence, you start seeing what truly drives you: the fear of being left behind, the sense of inadequacy, the craving for recognition. And only then can you choose a different way to live. The collective psyche does not vanish when we recognize it, but when we see it, it loses its control. Just as in darkness, a single small light renders the shadow no longer omnipotent. Each time you allow yourself true rest, you send a countercurrent message. I am no longer chasing. I am listening to myself. That is an act of redefining power. And perhaps, in a world where everyone seeks to stand out by doing more, the one who dares to rest is the truly free. For when you are no longer led by the crowd's rhythm, you begin to step to your own heartbeat, and that is the rhythm of the soul. Remember, not everyone who stops is a loser. Often, those who know how to pause are the ones advancing farthest. Because they are no longer dragged by the collective unconscious, they are moving in the opposite direction, inward. And that journey, as Jung said, is the journey back to oneself. Part 2. Rest is not emptiness, but a return. Most of us think rest means stopping, doing nothing at all. But in psychological depth, true rest is not emptiness, but a return to our own center, to the soul we abandoned in life's race. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Rest, in the Jungian spirit, is the moment we begin to open our eyes, not to see the world, but to see ourselves again. When we are tired, we often turn to forms of rest that are really just distractions, but in truth, we are fleeing silence. Because in that silence, we must hear the inner voice we've suppressed for years. That's why, even after a day of rest, we still feel exhausted, because the mind has never truly stopped. It has merely shifted from the work grind to the grind of avoidance. We are not resting. We are just changing our flavor of busyness. Jung saw this as false rest, a form of paralysis rather than recovery. Like plugging a charger into a powerless outlet, the screen shows the illusion of charging, while the battery continues to drain. The emptiness you feel does not come from doing too much, but from doing things that do not nourish your soul for too long. You live without truly being present. True rest begins in the moment you dare to sit still without filling the silence. When you no longer need music, reading, or screen taps to feel alive. In that silence, the first thing you encounter is not peace, but chaos. The mind starts screaming, repressed memories surface, unanswered questions rise, and you will want to flee them. But that is the threshold of return. If you've ever had such a moment where silence made you both afraid and longing to stay, tell me in the comments below. What did you hear from yourself? Jung believed that in each person's unconscious lies a center called the self, the source of spiritual light, wisdom, and deepest being. The ego is merely the outer shell, filled with roles, identities, and images we perform for the world. But the farther we stray from the self, the more empty we become, for we have lost the thread connecting us to our inner source of life. True rest is the journey back to the self, where the soul reconnects, where we stop performing and start living. Imagine two people walking in a forest. One listens to music in their ears, thinking about tomorrow's work while walking. The other turns off the phone, simply stepping quietly, feeling each breath, each sound, each breeze on their skin. Both are resting, but only one is truly present. Because rest is not leaving the world, but being fully present in this moment, without embellishment, without proof. In Jungian psychology, when we enter deep rest, the unconscious begins to flow like a natural stream. That is why we dream in sleep. And dreams are the voice of the unconscious, symbols, images, and hidden emotions seeking to be heard. If we learn to observe, to be still, we realize that in every dream, in every moment of quiet, the self is calling us home. But sadly, most of us are gradually deafened by too much outer noise. Rest does not weaken us. It strips away the false armor of strength so we can see our true power, the power of presence, of awakening, of a soul no longer fleeing. Just as a lake reflects the sky only when its waters are still, our mind sees truth only when it has learned stillness. In that state of rest, we no longer try to control life, but begin to trust its natural rhythm. Think of a forest after a storm, leaves fallen, branches broken, ground in disarray. But the forest does not panic, it does not rush to redo anything, it simply quiets. And in that quiet, life regenerates itself. Human rest is the same. When we allow ourselves to pause, what is exhausted begins to heal in ways the rational mind cannot comprehend. There is a beautiful paradox. The more we try to rest, to regain strength, the less we truly rest. Because rest cannot be done, it can only be allowed. When you stop striving, stop running, stop controlling, rest arrives on its own, like breath returning after panic. In that moment, you need not do anything. You only need to be. And that sheer being is the deepest form of rest. If we look deeper, rest is a spiritual act, not in a religious sense, but in the most primal meaning of spirit, breath, life. When we truly rest, we breathe again, we live again. And that is when we sense what Jung called the return of the essence. We are no longer defined by work, money, relationships, or what we do. We simply exist. And in that existence alone, we find the peace that a lifetime of striving could not yield. Rest is not emptiness. Emptiness is living without connection. Rest is connecting so deeply that we no longer need to do anything to prove our existence. It does not kill vital energy. On the contrary, it rebirths it, gently, enduringly, and wisely. And when the soul is revived in this way, you are not just healthier, you become lucid, strong, and possess a power no one can take, peace within yourself. So do not fear the stillness. Do not fear the moments without plans, without alarms, without tasks. For in those voids you are being filled, because the essence of rest is not doing nothing, but returning to where everything begins, inside you. Part 3. Why does rest make you dangerous? When you have truly experienced rest as a return, you will realize that stillness does not weaken you, it makes you different. And from here we step into an entirely new chapter. Why rest makes you dangerous? If what you've heard so far touches something profoundly real within you, as if your soul has just been called by name, then stay with me. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the journeys ahead. Because from this moment, we will delve deeper into the territory few dare to touch, where rest is not just recovery, but transformation. Part 4. Why does rest make you dangerous? Number 1. Because you are no longer controlled by the unconscious. When you are exhausted, your mind loses clarity. Then the unconscious takes the reins. You act like a puppet jerked by deep impulses, fear of abandonment, the need for recognition, obsession with control, and guilt complexes. You snap not because someone spoke wrongly, but because they touched an unhealed wound within you. You try to please others not out of kindness, but fear of rejection. You stay busy to the point of immobility, because if you stop, you must face the inner void. All of this, the unconscious is driving you, while you think you hold the wheel. True rest is the moment you reclaim control. When the body relaxes, when the mind quiets, when you stop chasing outer noise, that is when you begin to see the invisible strings still pulling you daily. That silence is not comfortable at first. It is like turning on the light in a long, darkened room. Dust, clutter, and old shadows emerge. But in that light, you see who is truly steering you. Jung believed that most human conflict arises from the ego, thinking it is the whole self, when in reality, it is but a tiny fragment of the totality. When you do not rest, you live entirely in the ego, the part always seeking to control, prove, and achieve. But when you learn to rest, the ego steps back, and deeper layers of the psyche begin to unfold. That is when consciousness meets the unconscious, where true inner dialogue occurs. And only in that meeting does the human begin to awaken. Imagine you are swimming in raging currents. When exhausted, survival instinct makes you thrash harder, more fearfully. The more you fight the water, the faster you sink. But if you let go, float on your back, let your body rise naturally, the water is no longer enemy. It becomes what buoys you. Rest is the same. When you stop resisting, stop tensing to control, the unconscious no longer steers you in the shadows. You begin to merge with it consciously, and that is power. Because most of the world acts unconsciously, people rage, love, envy, fear, and fight without knowing why. But you, when you master true rest, see the mechanism operating within yourself. You realize anger does not come from the other, but from your own wounded fragment. You see fear not as foe, but as a signal that something inside needs to be embraced. You stop reacting and start choosing responses. Rest makes you dangerous because you become conscious. A conscious mind is not easily manipulated. Advertising, media, and social norms can only steer those living on autopilot. But you, having touched stillness, see through the world's disguises, promises of happiness, success, worth. You begin to see clearly that most pursuits are illusions crafted to fill the void of inner disconnection. The danger of the rested person lies in their immunity to hypnosis. They no longer need to prove themselves through achievements, react to every stimulus, or compete for value. They are the type who enter a room and need no loud words to draw attention. Their presence suffices. That is the power of a free mind, a soul no longer controlled by the collective unconscious. In Jungian psychology, this is the first step of individuation, when you begin to realize you are not a role, not a social image, but a distinct being with your own soul, rhythm, and truth. Rest is when you detach from the crowd to hear your own sound again. And when you hear that sound, you no longer live by reflex. You live by consciousness. Many think dangerous means strong, tough, sharp, but in truth, the most dangerous is the one who understands themselves, for that person cannot be controlled, not by opinion, not by fear, not by the past. They have learned to pause, to see, and from there, to choose. Number 2, you can confront your own shadow, and when you are no longer controlled by the unconscious, something even deeper begins to happen. You start to see your own shadow. This is the second reason rest becomes dangerous. Because when you truly stop, you do not just encounter peace. You encounter the very part you have been avoiding your entire life. Carl Jung called that part the shadow of the human being. It is everything we deny about ourselves. Selfishness, envy, greed, fear, shame, old wounds never touched. In the grind of work and responsibilities, we are often swept into becoming the better version of ourselves. Polite, successful, resilient, and moral. But beneath that mask, a part of us is abandoned, locked in the darkness, waiting for the day it is acknowledged. Rest is the moment the door opens, and that part steps forward. That is why so many fear stillness, because when all outer sounds cease, the inner sounds begin to resound. The voices of repressed memories, denied emotions, and questions you do not want to answer. Some, when resting, suddenly feel heavy, sad, uncomfortable, not because they are resting wrong, but because the soul is beginning to revive. And in that process, all that has been forgotten returns to be healed. In Jung's psychoanalysis, the shadow is not the enemy, it is the hidden part of the light. Just as the moon shines only when facing the sun, a human becomes whole only when daring to confront the shadow within. If we do not recognize it, it controls us from the unconscious, making us judge others for what we refuse to accept in ourselves, making us repeat behaviors we think we hate. Rest, in its deepest sense, is the journey of bringing light into the dark. Try thinking of the last time you truly sat still, alone, no music, no screen, no plans. Perhaps just minutes later, the mind starts racing. Old mistakes, regrets, questions about self-worth. We often try to extinguish them with work, entertainment, or fleeting relationships. But when you truly rest, you can no longer escape. You confront. And in that confrontation, you begin to see, so I am still carrying the fear of abandonment from childhood. So I have not yet forgiven myself. So I am still living to prove something to others. In that very moment, consciousness ignites. Many believe strength is fearlessness, but Jung pointed out the opposite. True strength is daring to look straight at your fear without fleeing. When we dare to gaze into the shadow, it no longer holds the power it once did. Like turning on the light in a room, the darkness dissolves, not because you defeated it, but because you brought light in. Rest is that act, the moment you sit down and say to yourself, "Okay, I am ready to hear you speak." In psychotherapy, this is called the integration process. When you dare to recognize the shadow, not denying, not judging, but listening and embracing it, you are doing what most of humanity has yet to dare. Becoming whole. Jung believed wholeness is more important than perfection. Humans are not born to live only in the light. We are born to know both light and shadow and still choose to live with compassion. The shadow does not disappear when you look at it, but it loses its control over you. When you dare to sit with it, to listen to it, you no longer live dominated by reactions and old wounds. You begin to act from a different place, one of understanding, peace, and inner strength, and that is what makes you dangerous, not to others, but to fear, to pretense, to the illusions that once bound you. For the one no longer controlled cannot be led. Number 3, you are no longer swept into the games of power, comparison, and depletion. And when you have gathered the courage to look straight at your own shadow, something natural happens. You begin to escape the games of power, comparison, and depletion that the world is addicted to. Because the one who has confronted and made peace with themselves no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. You do not need to win, to be more, to be recognized, because you have found true value within. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And perhaps one of the most common ways to avoid confronting the soul is comparison. Comparison keeps us always looking outward to avoid turning inward. But when you know how to rest, truly rest, you are no longer driven by the fear of being left behind. You understand that your path cannot be measured by anyone else's ruler. Have you noticed that we are living in an economy of depletion? Everything around encourages you to do more, buy more, and show more. Social media turns life into a stage of masks. People do not share to connect, but to be recognized, envied, seen. But the paradox here is, the more we try to be seen, the more we lose ourselves. When you know rest, you no longer need the spotlight, because you have your own light within. Comparison does not just drain energy, it blurs the unique essence of each person. It turns you into an edited version of countless others, a mix of the crowd's aspirations, fears, and expectations. Jung said that the ego cannot mature if it remains assimilated to the social image. Only when we dare to withdraw, to be still, do we begin to hear the soul's own rhythm. And that is what rest brings. It returns you to your true frequency, in a world noisy from wanting to synchronize. When you rest deeply enough, you see that all power games stem from fear. People want to control others out of fear of losing power, want to prove themselves out of fear of being forgotten, want to compete out of fear of not being enough. But when you truly reconnect with your essence, you realize you need not control anything. Life is not a battlefield, but a flow. The one in their true life rhythm does not compete, they resonate. Something is intriguing. When you are still, those still in the grind of comparison will not understand you. They will think you lazy, passive, lacking ambition. But only those who have experienced burnout, lived in the noise, understand that rest is not surrender, but reclaiming power. In stillness, you see clearly what truly matters. You no longer choose by more, but by right. You need not prove you are good, because you are truly living well. Rest helps you leave the low-energy games, where people deplete each other through envy, measurement, and judgment. Because the nature of those games is, everyone loses. Today's winner is burdened tomorrow by fear. But the one who knows rest, knows retreat, steps off the board. And when you stand outside, everything becomes clear. No one is a rival, no one a threat. Only souls at different stages on the same awakening journey. In Jungian psychology, when a person dares to withdraw from collective games, they enter the autonomous phase of individuation, where the self is no longer defined by social position or comparison to others, but by their relationship to the self. And that relationship creates the quiet power others sense, even without a word spoken. When you truly know rest, you do not just recover energy, you escape the matrix of depletion. You are not drawn into others' energy, not swayed by praise or criticism, not shaken by success or failure. You become dangerous, not because you want to outdo anyone, but because you no longer play by their rules. That is why those who rest deeply, who truly abide in themselves, draw the world's attention without effort, because they no longer expend energy chasing others. They simply walk, lightly, but so steadfastly that nothing can shake them, and that is the power of stillness. It silences all noise. Part 4. Rest is an essential step in the individuation process. Here you step into true transformation, the journey of individuation. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And rest, in its deepest spiritual sense, is the indispensable step for that to happen. Individuation is the process by which a person separates from the pressures of the collective unconscious to return and unite with the self, the deepest and truest center in each of us. It is not the journey to become a better version of oneself, but to become whole, unifying light and dark, reason and emotion, ego and soul. But what many do not realize is that the process cannot occur while you are still running, because to see yourself, you must be still enough to look. Rest is the necessary silence for consciousness and the unconscious to meet. In everyday life, we operate mainly by consciousness, calculating, planning, and controlling. But the unconscious, holding all emotions, memories, intuitions, and forgotten potentials, only speaks when we quiet down. In moments of true rest, when the mind ceases its clamor, the unconscious begins to voice itself. It speaks in images, dreams, in nameless feelings, in strange urges guiding us in directions reason cannot fathom. And that is how the self leads us closer to our true essence. Recall the moments of insight in your life, not when you strained to think, but when you paused, while walking in the afternoon sun, watching rain fall or waking from deep sleep. That is when the mind is so still that unconscious wisdom has a chance to surface in the waters of consciousness. Just as muddy water becomes clear only when left undisturbed, a human can only see their true depth when knowing rest. Individuation is not an achievement, but a lifelong return, and the rest is each breath of that journey. Because each time you rest, you draw energy from outside back inward. You reconnect with the soul's natural rhythm. When swept into the world's grind, our psychic energy scatters. We think too much, worry too much, chase too much. But when we rest, that energy returns, and the entire psychic system begins to rebalance. Jung once said, "One cannot become conscious without rest, because rest is not just relaxation, but the restructuring of the soul. It is the space allowing the old to dissolve so the new can form. Just as after autumn's leaf fall, the earth needs a silent winter for new shoots to rise in spring, so the human soul needs seasons of rest to rebirth itself. When we deny ourselves rest, we deny ourselves growth." In Jungian therapy, deep rests are called liminal spaces, the threshold between the known and the emerging. It is where true transformation occurs. But this space is frightening, because there you are no longer the old self, yet not yet the new. No identity to cling to, no achievements to prove. That is why most people choose to return to the old grind, where they feel safe. But the one who knows rest, who stays in that silence, dares to let themselves be reborn. There is something Jung understood more deeply than most thinkers of his time. All spiritual evolution demands stopping. You cannot become yourself if you do not know how to release what is no longer you. But releasing is never easy. It is like peeling away layers of skin turned to armor. Rest is the space for that process, the space for soul fragments to return, for the deepest part within you to say, "Enough, now is the time to return." Think of the artist before creation. They need silence, emptiness, because creation does not come from doing more, but from allowing life to flow through. Humans are the same. We do not create inner evolution. We only create conditions for it to happen, and that condition is rest, the state of openness, stillness, and trust. Individuation ultimately is the journey back to your uniqueness, but to hear the soul's voice you must disconnect from outer noise. Rest is the bridge between the outer world and the inner, where the ego learns to quiet so the self can speak. Then you begin to act not from fear or the need to control, but from an authentic inner urging. Thus, rest is not a period in your life story. It is a sacred comma where everything pauses only to continue more deeply, more truly, more wholly. The one who knows rest does not stop to escape life, but to return to life itself, but this time with the eyes of one truly awakened. In the end, the question is not, "Are you doing enough?" but "Are you present enough with yourself?" The world out there will always demanding you be faster, better, more. But your soul does not. It only wants you here, wants you to breathe slower. And when a human aligns with their soul, that person needs no shout to be heard. Their stillness becomes the sound. So, if you are at the threshold of exhaustion, do not see it as failure. See it as an invitation to return, an invitation to step out of the collective unconscious, an invitation to become dangerous in the most beautiful way, no longer defined by any rhythm, but the rhythm of your soul.